Hey, y'all. All right, I know it's the end of the day. Y'all can do better.
Yeah.
Thank you.
From your chest.
Thank you so much. My name's Tanya DePass. Welcome to our panel. It's my last panel of PAX. You have no fucking idea how excited I am right now. But I am very, very pleased and honored and happy to have a wonderful crew of panelists here with me. In case you did not see the description, didn't read the guidebook or the app, this is what our panel is. And trigger warnings, content warnings. We may and probably will talk about things that have been said to us, about us, etc. If anyone needs to self-care, please feel free to leave. We will not hold against you. Self-care is far more important than hearing us talk. And the panel is being recorded, so you can catch up later. Yay. All right, I have talked a lot this convention, so starting next to me, I'm gonna let folks introduce themselves. Our Twitter handles are up there. Again, feel free to tweet, but please do not video record as we are recording the panel for our own use. And just to confirm, everyone on the panel is fine with photos?
Yep.
Okay. All right, Kahlief, it's you.
Just make sure you get my beard. My beard is looking real good right now. Kahlief Adams, 1/3 of the Spawn on Me podcast, co-founder. 1/4 of the. I'm sorry. You're 1/4 of the Spawn on Me podcast. I'm sorry, Tanya. I love you. Also, the greatest greystone on the planet in Paragon. Just want y'all to know. And also super happy that you're all here and super excited for this. It's gonna be dope.
I am Brandon Stennis, aka UGR Gaming. I'm a Twitch partner, also the U.S. community manager for XSplit, and overall social media gift master. So yeah.
I'm Zoe Quinn. I am an independent game developer, and in 2 days, oh God, I'll technically be an author. And I have run a crisis hotline that helps people that are being attacked by a lot of things you are probably familiar with if you're at this panel.
I'm Shana Bryant, senior producer at Take-Two Interactive. I've been in the industry almost 15 years. I've worked at, sorry, I'm really close to this mic right now. Worked at Electronic Arts, Midway Games, Capcom for 4.5 years or so. Did Face Computers at Microsoft, and now I'm at Take-Two Interactive. I'm also an author. I run a tiny blog called themushroomqueendom.com that doesn't get updated nearly enough. At least as far as my mentor says. And then also I just recently started a webcomic called Terrible Allies, which is about terrible allies.
I'm Kaitlyn Tremblay. I'm a freelance indie games writer and narrative designer. I am also an author, which is really cool. Yeah, that's me.
So before we get into our stories, I just wanted to talk briefly about why I decided to have this panel. A lot of people, all of us have experienced in some way or another, folks who are like, oh my God, you're famous, or you're infamous, or you're E-famous, pick your poison. And they want to know all about how we got there, but a lot of people don't want to hear about the actual progression. They just want to see where you are, getting invited to conferences, getting invited to be influencers, things like that, being partner streamers, being authors, being devs, but they don't think about the road to get there. So this is going to be that uncomfortable conversation a lot of people actually need to have, because many people want to be, they quote unquote want to be where you are without starting at the ground level. So we're going to talk about our stories a little bit and then get into what does it mean to even have made it, quote unquote. And thanks to Kaitlyn for bringing that up and putting the slide in for that. So we're each going to talk briefly about kind of our journey, including failure, if folks are comfortable. And going from there, we will talk about more about what it means to have made it and a few intersectional specific things to talk about, because the brown folks on the panel have a +10 damage modifier in being out here and about. So Zoe, if you would like to go first.
Sure. So I took kind of a weird path to game development. I didn't really do anything other than sort of come out of Trailer Park, Appalachia, and work a bunch of weird odd jobs until I ended up having an internet friend in Toronto that's like, hey, all that sucks. Do you want to try doing the art thing? You can come live with me. And I'm like, hey, yeah, this totally won't end in me dying. Let's do it, yeah. I want to at least try and see if I can do it or not. And fail, and then I'll not wonder, and I can go back to working crappy jobs. Somehow this turned into running into the independent game scene in Toronto, which was putting on a diversity initiative, which was entirely grassroots run by other indies. And they were like, yeah, let's teach 6 women how to make their first games in 6 weeks. And that went kind of okay. I'm still making games, which is cool. And I was immediately like, oh, okay, I like this community thing. This is the thing that I really dig. And I didn't know people could make games like as a person and not as hundreds of people with all of the money. And I had not programmed. So it wasn't until I was like 25, I think, that I actually started coding at all. And I started running a bunch of community events at the same time because I wanted to give back everything that I learned to the next person too, because I felt like not only does that get me excited about what I was doing, but I felt like I owed it to the community to put back in as much as I was getting out. And it taught me so much because it's like new people in scenes bring a lot of cool new perspectives with them. So I did a lot of totally unpaid labor for a very long time. My first game incubator that I ran for other people, I got myself super sick because I was at the space that I had busted ass to get donated to us so we could just like work together every day from like 10 a.m. till like 8 p.m. just in case any of the people that were learning for the first time wanted to come in. It was like a bit much. I made a bunch of free games, like trying to make as much tiny stuff, like go any place that would have me, that wanted me to volunteer or organize that could help cover travel or anything like that. Just like if you build me, I will come there. And just like there was points where I was only home for like, and home was like a tiny, like very bad closet apartment basically, for like a few days a month. And I did that for a very, very long time while having a minimum wage coffee shop job to actually support all of this, until I got pneumonia and needed some time off, and this was after I had gone to Boston. And I basically got fired for needing time off for getting sick. And then I went home, I filmed a trailer for a game I'd kind of been working on. You can still see in the trailer that my eyes are red because I was like sitting on the curb, coughing and crying, because I had a period of homelessness earlier in my life, and I was like so terrified that I was going to be doing that again. So I went home, filmed the trailer for Depression Quest, and announced that the release date was Valentine's Day, because this happened on February 1st. Partially because even when I'm super depressed, I am still kind of a snarky asshole. And also to try to be like, you know what, I've been trying this game thing for a while. I've had a hard time interviewing at studios. I've gotten asked questions like, what have you done to bring on sexual harassment to yourself in interviews? I've gotten almost like taken out of a sexual harassment training video from the 70s, like one of those awkward shoulder rubs that, like from a producer I was interviewing with. So like trying to find a well-paying job in games was doing nothing for me despite all of this hustle, which was like years at this point. And I ended up making Depression Quests as something to see, like I had to put my brain somewhere because I knew myself and my mental health issues enough that if I wasn't super consumed with doing something right then other than just the job hunt and praying, and I didn't have like a family to go back to or a safety net, that my worst fears would come true. So I expected 3 people to maybe play it. I mostly did it to try to as a life raft without getting too dark about it. And it blew up. And I got invited to more stuff, and I started going on the road even more and trying to figure out, okay, how can I actually get paid for my work? Because to this day, like all of my games are free. Like Depression Quest, you can pay what you want. We still donate to mental health organizations, like a portion of that. And yeah, so I'm still a little bit bad at getting paid. Then I ended up becoming, a lot of people got really mad at me for existing. I don't really feel the need to super go into the details on that, but if you've heard of Gamergate, I was ground zero. I had the worst OkCupid date ever, you guys. It's not good. And so now I'm like trying to figure out how to make lemons out of the lemon tree that has crashed onto my car and broken my windshield, and pay that forward. And part of that's like running the crisis hotline and like trying to be an advocate for other people and listening to other people being targeted and what can I do for you? What can I take out of this that isn't just a shitty thing that happened? And writing about it is that part, and that's where the book is coming in, and I'm really, at this point, just trying to get back to fucking making games already. And that's sort of my journey, and it's ongoing and weird, and I really just want a lot of the bad shit to be a footnote and not the headline.
Definitely.
Word.
Well, I appreciate you, Zoe.
I appreciate the hell out of you.
This will also be a love fest, just FYI. Shanae, would you like to continue?
Sure. All right. So, let me talk about how I got into the game industry. My story is not that interesting. It's very boring, actually. Usually when I've been on panels like this in the past where it's talking about how you get in the game industry, I wind up sitting next to folks who are the same point in their career, and they talk about, oh, you know, I got in the game industry because I did some fan art, and then I sent it to a magazine, and they loved it, and they were just like, hey, can you guys come and can you do this art for us every single month, and work their way up, and wound up parlaying that into games, and that's totally not my story. My story is boring, it is logical, it is, I've been playing games since the 80s. I was freaking, like, my sister plays games, my twin sister plays games, my dad plays games, we're a family of nerds. I've been playing games since, like, I figured out that these were thumbs. And I loved what that did. I loved being able to spend time, like, having those experiences and spending time with my family and my friends and just doing, like, super nerdy stuff. And around the time when I was 10 or 11 years old, you know, by that time, you probably were about 5 or 6 years, you've been having adults were asking you, hey, like, what do you want to be when you grow up? You know, and you'd say something like princess or president, you know, though the standard for being president has come down lately, but around the time when you're 10 or 11 years old, you really, like, your brain starts forming, you really start, like, thinking about what do I really want to do? And I started thinking about developing games. Because I said, you know what, somebody's making these things, and, you know, this is pre-internets, so it wasn't kids, right? They're like, there's people whose job it is to make these things, and I want to be one of those people. So this was back at the time before game design degrees and, like, where there was a clear path to get into the industry. So I said, I want to be, you know, I want to direct. You know, everyone wants to direct, right? I want to be a game designer, because that was basically the only job title that anybody knew in the industry. If you make games, you're a game designer, right? You code, you do the art, you're a game designer. So I decided I wanted to be a game designer. So I went to college, wanted to learn how to code, had this very logical pathway into game development. And around my senior year of college, decided I really hate writing code. Like, that is not for me. Like, sitting in front of a computer for 18 to 20 hours a day and not playing a game but writing a game was not my jam. So went ahead and got the degree, and then got a job at Electronic Arts, one of the few game companies that exist out in Orlando, Florida. So this is where it gets interesting, because I started off as a QA tester, you know, like the very bottom rung. And I was one of 2 women that was hired into a department that had 350 men. And it was also a sports game company as well, right? So you hear about locker room environments. This was a locker room environment. I recall one of my colleagues telling me, or recounting a story to me about a meeting that he had to sit in the day before I started, which he called the "Don't Make Me Fire You" meeting. That was where my future boss brought in all of what would be my future coworkers and said, hey guys, there's going to be a woman starting here. We haven't had a woman working in this department for at least 6 months, probably longer. Don't make me fire you. It didn't really get any more detailed than that, but I'm not sure it needed to get more detailed. That particular story told me a lot about, and I'd been working there for a few months before I came across it, but that particular story told me a lot about what sort of environment I was about to be working in. And I understand that my manager thought he was doing the right thing, thought, like, oh, I'm trying to create a safe space for her to feel like she can come to work and be comfortable. At the same time, he basically put a big scarlet letter on me saying, hey, that chick right there, the 2 women that work here, they can get you fired, right? They're different. They're not like you and I. They're here to come and ruin this awesome culture that we've created where we all wear jerseys and that kind of stuff. So, yeah, but, you know, I was probably 22, 23 when I started at Electronic Arts. I was excited. I was like, oh man, I'm working in the game industry. This is the most amazing thing in the world. And I wanted to fit in, you know? So, like, my colleagues, they all wore jerseys. I didn't quite wear jerseys, but at least started wearing t-shirts and wearing caps on my head and that kind of stuff. And I was like, I want to be one of the guys. Like humans like to try and fit in to spaces, right? And I'm in a space where I've already been called out as being different, and I'm like, well, I'm not different. I'm just like all of you, right? I like playing games, not sports games, but other games, And that was a really interesting experience because before I even started there, people already had a perception of what interacting with me, like they already had rules of how they could interact with me and the one other woman who worked on my team. So the other thing about working in Electronic Arts, and not to ding Electronic Arts, I'm sure there's probably some EA people here or something like that. Yay, EA people. It's in the South, right? And this is some of the stuff, like, I know this is called real talk, by the way, Tanya. I'm not sure how real we want to get.
As real as you want to be. Just keep in mind we are being recorded.
Like we want to get like 100% real. I don't know if we get 100% real. Well, let's see. We might start at like 20% real, and then we might bump it up in the course of the time.
You get 2 more minutes to get real as you fucking want to be.
2 more minutes. That's it? I could talk forever.
That's why I'm telling you 2 minutes. I love you.
Okay, well,
see, that's real talk. You can tell your friends.
She knows me. All right, well, then let me skip past a couple of things, right? So as one of my experiences in the industry, like I'm a woman, I'm a black person, I am a black woman in the industry. And I can tell you like a couple other things just as across my career for the last 15 years. I gave you a little bit of, I started talking about what the beginning of my career was. But just where I'm in my career even now, basically every interview I've ever been in for every job, someone has brought up my race or my gender, unsolicited in every interview. And that's a weird place to actually be in, right? Because, I know a lot of folks that we think to ourselves, well, if someone brought that up in my interview, I would just walk right out. But what if they bring it up in every single interview that you're ever in? You can't use that as a filter anymore, right? Because then you don't get a job. So, because I like telling stories and because I've got a little bit of time, I'll give you an example. Because after I left Capcom, before I started at Microsoft, face computers and HoloLens, that kind of shit, there was a little bit of a gap of a couple of mobile companies that I worked for that I don't tend to talk about very much. They don't exist anymore, so I can talk about them now. So I was interviewing for a job with this one mobile company. And you go through the hiring loop. I talked to a few different people, that kind of thing. And it's going really well. And then a gentleman walks in the room, and he's the CSO, I believe, the Chief Strategy Officer. He's walking in, he's got his coffee. And this is for a Korean company, a company that was starting a U.S. office here, and their base was in Korea. He walks in the room, closes the door. Before he even sets his coffee down, he just says, "So, what do you think about working with all these Asians?" How do you answer that, right? And my response is, of course, well, Asians are people. It's just like working with anyone else. I've been in this industry 15 years. I've worked with people of all shapes and sizes, people from all different backgrounds. My job as a producer is to be able to work with people, to figure out how people work the best, figure out what their strengths and weaknesses are, figure out how do we fit them together, like people who have very different backgrounds and skills, and make something awesome. And he's like, okay, cool. Sits his coffee down, sits down in the room, like gets comfortable. Doesn't seem like he felt like he asked a weird question or not, but it's kind of weird. And he continues. We start to have a little bit of a conversation, and then suddenly he pauses and he says, "So I want to ask you something, but I don't know how to ask it without getting in trouble." So I'm like, okay, well, let me buckle in for this right here. And his question is, well, I just wanted to ask, like, how do you think you're going to be able to boss all these guys around? And this question, I know this question well. I've gotten this question for years. What this question actually is, hey, you're a woman. What do you think about, how are you going to go about bossing all these not women around? How do you do that? It's a bullshit question, right? At that point, the whole reason, like I'm in the interview, I've passed all the interim checks. If I'm in that room, it's because I should be in that room. It's because I've been doing this for 15 years. I'd been a producer for somewhere around 7 or 8 years. I'd worked on big titles, worked on small titles. I'm in this room because I'm supposed to be in this room, and I'm in this room because I know how to work with people, And hey, this industry is overwhelmingly male. It is overwhelmingly white. And there's no change here. Like the demographic of this particular team is not different from any other team. I think I can handle it. So when we talk about some of the experiences we have, like I understand as a black woman, I'm somewhat of a unicorn. I know you're giving me time checks. I'm wrapping up. Sorry. Last thing I will just say, and we'll get back to me, it's like that as well. Some of these stories, like these are experiences that are shared experiences, and one of the things about being in this industry, it's an amazing industry. Like I've been in it for 15 years. I don't plan on leaving. I just came back to it as well. But we want to make sure that we're being honest and open about the challenges that we have in this industry and things that even for those of us who are on this stage and have been doing a lot of amazing things, it's a rocky road sometimes to get there.
Definitely. Yeah, because anybody who follows me on Twitter, y'all see what I get on a daily basis. So Brandon, you have a short but really amazing journey, because I feel like I've watched all the stuff you've done. And I'm just like, you never sleep, do you?
I don't have sleep. I don't know what that is anymore.
So could you run us through a little quickly of your story, please?
Yeah. So basically, when I went to college, I wanted to be a teacher. And when I got out of college, I had the mistake of thinking that, when you get to college and get out, you get a job right away. And for a while, I was looking for jobs, and I didn't have any, experience at the time. So I was unemployed for probably like a summer, and I was doing just playing video games all the time with my friends. And I always loved writing, and I wanted to be a writer. So one day I said to myself, why don't I just, make a blog about video games, talk about reviews and stuff. So that's what ugrgaming.com was, 2012. And I started to, post on Twitter, trying to gain an audience, and people started to read like my articles. And I started to reach out to companies to try to get sponsorships. And then I eventually got taken to PAX East a few years ago. Well, yeah, a long time ago. I've been doing this for 5 years, but people don't know that sometimes. And we, I had a team of people. We started a podcast that ended up on iHeartRadio. And then Twitch came about because I wanted to start marketing my website through Twitch. And I realized that you can't market a website through Twitch. It doesn't work like that. And I began streaming and just being myself. And because I've always been afraid to be myself because of my friends who are now okay with me now. They didn't get my humor, and I was always made to feel like me being crazy on the internet or just being myself was just weird. And when I started to just be myself on Twitch, I found a lot of people coming in to understand me and think I was funny. And I was like, I should keep doing this. I like this a lot. And I was, working at Walgreens for a while, and I was really not trying to talk about my personal life, and it did help me learn about interacting with people and different kind of people all the time. Retail definitely does that if you work in retail, you know what I mean? So through the website, I got a email from a marketing company called Golan Harris, and they said, we saw your website, and we're starting up this new marketing thing for our McDonald's team. Would you want to work on our social media team? And at the time, I'm working at Walgreens thinking that this is a spam email, so I'm not thinking this is real. And I go into my first real professional job, and I worked for Golan Harris for McDonald's PR for a year. And then one day I get a knock. Hey, Brandon, we gotta talk to you real quick. And I'm like, all right, cool, what's going on? And so my boss sits me down and he says, hey, so McDonald's is gonna let you go. And I said, what do you mean? I've been doing a good job and all that stuff. So basically, their budget was they wanted to lower it. So they tell me that my last day was on my birthday, which was great. Well, I don't know what I'm gonna do. I have bills I have to pay, I live by myself, and I'm streaming on Twitch. I have absolutely no idea what I'm gonna do. So on my birthday, I went to work the final day, depressed, and went home and I streamed on Twitch, and it was the greatest night of my life because everybody came in, they knew what was going on, and it made me feel like this is something I wanna do, and I need to keep doing it. And through that, I was unemployed for 3 months, and I strictly streamed on Twitch full time and tried to make it that way, but I started to see that it was just something I couldn't do, and I wanted to still be a streamer, but I wanted to work in the industry. So luckily I found the job through the Illinois Lottery, doing social media with them, and I got, let's see what happened. This is funny because Twitter is everything to me. I complained on Twitter about something, like I was on a stream team, and I was like, I don't know why stream teams don't do much for us. That was the tweet. And so I got an email from the UK community manager of XSplit, and messaged me saying, hey, Brandon, like, are you talking about us? Like, we'll do whatever you want. Like, tell us everything, tell everything that you don't like about it. And I was like, I wasn't talking about you guys, I'm sorry. Like, I love you guys. But I was like, okay, let me do this because, like, you know, there are some things that I feel could be different. And so he sent that email to my current boss, and they said, you know, the reason why we're not doing anything in the US is because we currently don't have a US community manager. And I said, oh, okay, well, I mean, here's my resume. Why don't you check me out? And so I was sitting in the Illinois lottery, and they told me that they wanted to do an interview. So I went downstairs, like, I'm gonna go to the bathroom. It'll be like 20 minutes. So I'm sitting downstairs, like with XSplit, talking to them, and I'm like, all right, so I'm at this job right now. I gotta be really quick, but I love this company. Let's do it. And I sat for 2 weeks. They didn't say anything to me, and I was like, all right, cool. So a few weeks later, I got an email from Twitch saying I had gotten partnered. So I started freaking out because I had been streaming on Twitch for 2 years at this point, and like had been grinding and doing all kinds of stuff to try to like put my name out there. And then the next day, I get an email from XSplit saying, hey, you have a job. And I said, wait, you're telling me I got partnered on Twitch and I also got a job with XSplit? I have two things I wanted like this? Okay. So who's faking this? Like, who paid people to do this? Because this can't be real. And so that's pretty much how I got to this point. It was just a lot of struggles and, you know, being, like, not having a job and having to make ways to do stuff. And ever since, like, these two things have happened, like, it has blown up. And I think, for my perspective, I feel like with social media, I'm kind of a jokester. If you guys follow me on Twitter, I love GIFs, so I thank GIFs for that. And I'm just like kind of a support system for people who are streaming on Twitch who want to learn more or want to get into in the industry, because I know when I started, I didn't really have that many people that I could look up to and talk to about it, and I want to be that beacon of hope that, like, hey, if you're a streamer on Twitch, you know, there's a more to just being a streamer. Like, it opens up the doors for so many things, and you want to be open to that. So, yeah.
Yay.
Nice.
And Brandon is part of why I keep streaming, along with our friend Andrea. Hey, no joke. Brandon is one of the few. Brandon is the first person I subscribed to on Twitch with actual money.
Thank you for that. Paying the bills. Appreciate that.
Oh, I get to talk about myself. Yay. So for those who follow me on Twitter, and I will try to be brief because we're already at the halfway point, I do want to have a little time for Q&A. So I was mad about video games at 6 in the morning, October 7th, 2014. I was mad about a lot of things, and then I started hashtagging tweets with, I need diverse games. And two things happened. My friend Mickey Kendall, who has a much, much larger Twitter presence than I do, retweeted me. When someone with 30,000 Twitter followers retweets you, one of two things happens. Either you get a lot of randos, or you get a lot of exposure. And before I got to work, it was trending. And that's when I learned about block bots. And that was not a fun couple of weeks. Because the hashtag started on my personal Twitter and eventually got its own Twitter account. The conversation happened because unfortunately it was kind of also in the midst of the great evil and dark lord rising known as Gamergate. So just for the record, I do not give Gamergate credit for where I am today. I will not do it. If anyone writes about this panel and says that, I will come find you. Because that happened a lot and it still pisses me off. So a community came out of it. People wanted to have this conversation. And then in August of 2016, we became a nonprofit 501c3 because a lot of people, even through the little bit we could do through Patreon and me going to panels and talking about this, sorry, I'm hoarse because of all the talking I've done, it had an impact. And quickly, one thing that really cemented what I'm doing as having an impact was GamerX4. And I go on panels a lot. A lot of times these panels, you know, not all the topics, but a lot of times it's stuff that I know about. I can talk about it in my sleep. It's not a challenge. However, for someone sitting in the audience who has never seen a black person on a panel talk about something beside diversity, it's impactful, it's meaningful. And two folks came up to me in GamerX and told me that and talked about how it made them feel like they could do that. They could actually sit on a panel and talk about what's important to them. I burst into tears because I never thought being mad on the fucking internet at 6 in the morning before work would lead to something like this, or getting invited to conferences, or, you know, or making such amazing friends as I have on this panel. So now I do diversity consulting. I talk a lot on panels. I run my mouth a lot when I can't sleep on Twitter. So if you do follow me, expect like random 5 a.m. rants about whatever's going on in the world. And I'm also part of the Spawn on Me podcast, even though Kahlief forgot about me. I still love you. I canceled the podcast, ended the podcast I did that also came out of I Need Diverse Games after 2 years and 95 episodes, because doing a podcast by yourself sucks. That is a lot of failure on my part because I hate editing. I'm just going to tell you all now. If you ever want me to podcast again, somebody better volunteer to edit. So that's what I do, and that's why I wanted to have this panel. So Kahlief and Kaitlyn, your stories are next, and I do want to be cognizant of time so we can get through kind of the rest of our topics. So Kahlief, it's all you.
I'll be super quick. My first console had wood paneling on it, so that tells you about how old I am.
I'm older.
Whatever. I love you. So I started a Spawn Point blog in 2011 because I was sitting at my desk at my job doing IT work at a union back in New York, and I felt really stupid hearing someone ask me, how does my mouse work? So I was like, I don't want to tell you how your mouse works, and I want to feel smart again, so I need to figure out a way to make my brain work. So I was like, well, let me try to write. Let me see if that will do something. I love video games. I've been playing video games since I was 3. So being able to kind of figure out what that was would be really cool. So we started a blog. I started a blog. And started to write, and it was really fun. And I was like, wow, somebody actually listened to what I did, and they read what I wrote. And then I wrote something long, and then no one read it. And I was like, damn, people don't like when you write long things, and that sucks. But SEO is great if you put bullet points, and that's dope. And then I did bullet point articles, and then that sucked, and then nobody read it anymore. So I shut it down. But we did have some success in that space. We had a game called Sound Shapes that was out, if anybody remembers that game. And Sound Shapes, we did some reporting on the DLC that came from the community. So we interviewed some folks and got them on the site. And then Sony looked out and they were like, hey, we were going to do something like this, so maybe we can do this together. So that was like the first success that I had in the gaming industry, was being able to have a big name brand kind of look at what I was doing and say, oh, that's really good. Maybe we can do something with that. Fast forward, Spawn Point blog turned into Spawn on Me with Tanya and my other 2 co-hosts, Cicero and Sharif. Brought them all on. And wanted to figure out what we were going to do in the space that was different. Someone asked me, they said, you do a podcast about gaming, that's cool, but what's the twist on it? I said, well, no one's doing a show about people of color in the industry. I see things in games that don't really click with me all the time. And how can I express what I'm feeling? But through, maybe a podcast, that'll be cool, since no one wants to read the long form stuff I'm writing. So I might as well figure out how to do that thing. So fast forward again, we've been doing it for 4 years now. We're heard in over 60 countries. We did almost 189 shows at this point. And it's been phenomenal being able to kind of bring people to the table who hadn't had a voice and who are able to kind of share the reasons why they are in this industry and why they do what they do and how they bring the wonderful games that you all get to play.
Cool. So I kind of took a really weird way to get into games. I was working full-time in book publishing as an editor, and was also around, I loved games, was playing games constantly, and moved to Toronto and kind of found the indie game scene there, and it kind of became this reprieve away from book publishing, which I don't know if anybody is in the book publishing industry, and I won't slam it too much, was not fun. It was exhausting, and I quickly started to realize where I wanted to be, mainly because there's a lot of gatekeeping, and there's a lot of frowning upon indie work, and self-pubbing, and any kind of individual expression is really hard to get treated with authority and respect. So while doing this, I started creating my own personal games in Twine, and my first game was a very super duper hardcore body horror game where you dismember the main character. But it was a way for me to confront 2 things, which was getting out of a 5-year abusive relationship, and also finally starting eating disorder recovery. And so those were things that I just couldn't talk about at the publishing house that I was with, and I just couldn't engage with in that world. And so I made this game and then released it, and somebody was like, hey, that's a really cool body horror game you just made. And I was like, that was horror? I was like, that's just how I feel. And they're like, oh, honey. So I released the game, and then immediately, like 2 minutes later, my abuser called me. We were already broken up this time, and I like hid behind the couch. Like, it was my phone. Nobody was at the door, but I still hid from it. And then it stopped ringing, and then I checked the voicemail. He was like, please call me as soon as you get this. I just want to clear something up with you. And I was like, delete. And then never heard from him again. But releasing that game was hard. It was rough, and it was ugly, and it was terrible, and it brought up a lot of bad things, but it also connected me to a mental health games community that I didn't even know existed. It connected me to so many people who were like, hey, me too, I got this. Let's kind of talk about this. Or not, let's just talk about games. And so for the next couple of years, I was still working full-time, and I just kept making these games, and these horror games about different iterations of my recovery of different kind of mental illnesses and things, and people kept responding. And we kind of like bridged around each other, kind of like the way blood clots a bit. And it was amazing, and it was powerful, and it was something that I felt empty when I wasn't doing. And I started realizing, like, I'm always creating these games. Like, I'm not making any money off of them. I'm staying up. I'm working 12 hours to try to make them. Why am I doing this? And it just kind of set me right, and it kind of made me realize that I wasn't fulfilled in what I was doing, and made me realize that this community worked for me here, and there was a reason why people were responding to what I was doing, and why I was able to build these connections and actually start healing, and not just like ripping open wounds all of the time, which is what a lot of writing about mental illness can be. Fast forward a bunch of years, still working in book publishing, working 12 hours, doing game stuff, working for studios like Freelance, kind of attending conferences, talking about mental health, kind of getting involved with the mental health community, running game dev workshops for people with different mental illnesses put on by the City of Toronto, which was amazing, and just really feeling fulfilled and awesome. Being able to kind of like work with people and help people and get them to where I was starting to be like, hey, I don't hate myself every day. And then I finally got my first studio job about 5 years out of this. And I was like, yeah, I got my first video game studio job. It's awesome. I'm full-time writing. This is what I've always wanted to do. It was awful. They were super sexist to me and shitty, and it was really terrible, and kept changing the conditions of my work. And then finally, it got to the point where my mental health was getting back to where it was when I was in publishing and before I had started making all of my own games. And I was kind of like, you know what? Like, it's not. I can't do this. I can't be back here. I worked so hard, and games gave me so much empowerment that I can't let them now become a tool of like harm again. So I quit. And I say I quit like it was nothing, but like I cried for 4 days, and I was like, I can't afford rent if I quit. And then I got a freelance games writing contract that would let me afford rent, and then they dropped me 2 months out, and then I was like, fuck, what do I do? But because I had spent all that time like investing in my community, building personal friendships and networks that meant something to me, I was able to kind of segue into full-time freelance, and I've never been happier.
Awesome. Well, I'm very glad you're here, Kaitlyn.
Thank you.
So we've talked quite a bit, and in the interest of time, I'm going to kind of go through a couple of our slides quickly, and I do want to have time for questions. So at 7:20, people can line up. And this is going to be something I reinforce more than usual. If you have a question, then stand up to the mic. If you don't have a question, stay in your seat. I've asked my friends to be on this panel so we can have a very frank discussion, and you will respect the panelists. If you cannot do so, your mic will be cut, and you will be asked to sit down and or leave. I am a very hard moderator, but in this instance, I'm really not going to play with anybody in this room, just to be clear. Are we good? A little louder, because that was like 2 people. Thank you. So I'm going to get through some of our slides and just talk through them really quick, because I do want to at least talk about a sense of that path that we had to take and the failures that we had, because a lot of us don't talk about failure. We're conditioned not to think about it. We think whoever we see at the apex has always been there, they're golden, and we don't look at, or if we do learn about their failures, it kills the shine on what they've done, and we think that they are not as good. There's a moral failing. So quickly, Brandon, Kahlief, and I, and Shana, I'm sure we all heard this saying, you know, I have to be twice as good to get half
It's
as
gonna be a
far.
good tattoo one day.
Yeah.
I'm just gonna put that on my body somewhere.
I'm not. I'm like, I succeeded. Fuck y'all. But no, this is just something to be aware of. So anyone in the room who is not a person of color, or who may not have heard this growing up, you know, the things that we have accomplished, the things that we have done, are harder to have come by, because so many people don't get a chance to get where we are, and they hustle just as fucking hard as we do, if not harder. But, you know, for whatever reason, either they don't get the access, they don't get their portfolio in front of the right person, or, you know, whatever happens, and somebody's got it out for them, and they get taken down before they get a chance to start. So when you are thinking about what you're doing on your path, think about lifting up a person of color who may not have the same opportunities as you. 'Cause there's a lot of mediocre white folks that I know personally that I wonder how they got where they are, and I go, oh yeah, nepotism. They were in college with someone, they knew a buddy, and it bears out that they don't really have the skill to be where they are. This is just a follow-up on that, because when you're visible, and we can transition this into talking about failure before we take questions. A lot of times when you are visible, or hyper-visible as it may be, when you fail once, it is the end of everything, and no one ever lets you fucking forget it. One of my friends is a 2-time Hugo winner. She is terrified of failing in person or online and saying one thing that can be misconstrued, because Twitter's the devil and is also an angel on your shoulder. So just a couple of us, do you want to talk about like kind of either failures you've had or things that made you almost want to quit, other than what we've talked about already?
I could go with a recent example. So I'm working on my second game, and there is, I don't even know how many people that are actively combing through every single thing I say and do to try to find something to push me to this failure point. So, you know, that's something, it's been 3 years of this hyper visibility that Tanya mentioned. And I'm kind of used to that just being like the background, but to then create in that space where there's already this sort of background looking for reasons to trip you up, looking for something to spin into a conspiracy that will that might look just passably plausible enough to spread, because it's like so much of my career has been dogged by just shit that's not true. It's like the pressure on a sophomore release as an indie already is like so much. I'm switching genres. I'm doing an extremely queer game. I'm doing an experimental game, and my team we have a lot of different. My team is very diverse as far as like. We used to joke in meetings that my business partner was our token straight white man, and then he's someone who lives with disability, and he would like roll into the room and make jokes about that at the across the table to kind of like start it off, and when we were kind of like making people feel a little bit uncomfortable with like humor, and with mixed results. So it's like to try to like release the second game under those terms. It's like, I have pressured myself so hard in crunch to try to make every little thing perfectly, more so than you've already have like the indie neurosis, the sophomore-itis neurosis, and then there are so many people who actively want me to fail neurosis that I kind of shut down, especially as someone who has mental health, and I broke. And nobody heard from me for 3 days, and everybody got very worried about me. And I actually compromised my own immune system and got an infection on I have a dermatitis thing that I get like infections around my nose and my mouth, and I compromised my immune system so badly that a tooth infection actually started to kind of poison my blood, and I've had massive dental surgery up until the point where I flew to here to release the thing. So like the failures are an ongoing thing to try to like work around, and the pressure that comes with the hypervisibility, because it's not just me failing, it's like, oh, if someone who's a marginalized person fails, then it's like, oh, see, this is the reason we can't. like, this is why we can't, you know, like, they're inferior. Look at this failure point. And, like, I feel like it's very easy to internalize that and want to be, like, the model person who's like, no, see, look, I'm, like, really good at this. Everything is perfect, and nothing's ever perfect. No game is ever perfect. You just have to ship at some point. And that's, like, that's my most recent failure, given that it's, like, last 2 weeks ago now, I think.
Yeah.
So, yeah, self-care failure is pretty massive, and it fucks over everyone on your team and makes you a kind of a bad leader, as it turns out sometimes.
But you're an awesome person.
So are you.
I have not talked about much failure. I know most of us did, talking about a personal journey. I lost my job, my day job, in 2015. I came back from GamerX 3, got to work, set up my office because we had moved right before I left. Was allowed to work half a day, and then I was let go 10 days before Christmas. I'd already been doing basically 2 jobs trying to run I Need to Burst games. It's a real shitty feeling to come back after you spent, you know, a week away, spent a lot of money, expecting to come back, you know, get paid, whatever, and suddenly not have a job within a half day of returning. And I almost quit. I almost just said, well, I guess that's it. I can't do anything. Because I started to worry about, again, how am I going to have a roof over my head? Because, you know, no surprise, people working in higher ed don't make a lot of money. I was living check to check. And Patreon was just something I was doing for extra money at that point. It wasn't okay, I need Patreon in order to survive. But community stepped up, and I'm very honored and thankful that now I can actually pay my bills, more or less, from Patreon. And keep doing this work, because if Patreon ever fails, I will be back at a desk job, and what I do will crumble, because there's only one of me, and I can't sacrifice myself, my well-being, no matter how much I love the mission. I just want to throw this slide up there before we talk about what being successful means as folks get to line up for questions. Another thing that comes up a lot is instant success. People think, oh, because I heard of you now, that you came whole cloth out of nowhere, out of thin air, when a lot of times we've been all grinding for years for what we've been doing. But all they see is like, oh, you've got 20,000 Twitter followers, or you're in this article, or you wrote this article, you made this game. And a lot of people just want to, I can't read that back here, there's a light in my face,
10
thank you.
minutes.
And so a lot of times, just think about the person that you're seeing has hustled. You know, let's kill the idea of instant fame, viral fame. Because trust me, if you are famous for something viral, it's probably not something you ever want in your life. That pedestal is crumbly. You will fall and break your neck. And, you know, don't discount the work someone had to do to get where they are. So while we talk briefly about what being successful means, because Kaitlyn threw this slide, and for folks who do have actual questions, you can start lining up, and we'll take a couple on each side. I'm not that scary. Stand up and ask a question. Or if not, hey, if there's no questions, then we get to end on time. So Kaitlyn, do you want to talk briefly about what being successful even means?
Yeah, so I had asked Tanya if we could include this slide because it's something that I wish I had been told many years ago, and it's something that I give talks at universities and schools, and kids always ask me, like, how do you get where you are? Like, and like just asking all these questions, and what I always end up talking about them with is like, what is success? Like, success isn't just being famous, or success isn't just working for a studio that you've always wanted to work for. Like, success can be whatever you want it to be, right? And so I really wish somebody had told me this before I went through a lot of heartache, but you can be successful no matter what, right? Like, you don't have to be popular or famous to be successful. And once I kind of realized that for myself, everything clicked, and I just got so much happier. And a lot of the imposter syndrome and a lot of the stress I was putting on myself just kind of like, not all of it, because that's hard shit, but a lot of it just kind of became easier to deal with, right? And so I just kind of wanted to put that in there so that think about what you want your success to be and then go for it, right? Like, success is what you define it as.
Awesome. All right, so we already have our 10-minute warning, so please give us your question.
Hey everyone, I'm Alex. I'm currently in one of those rough places, those rough patches. I was, not to get too real, but I was let go from my job like 5 days ago.
I'm so sorry.
Thank you. I really appreciate it. How do you balance, I know Zoe, you were talking about mental health and all that, coupled that with like, my partner's behind me, Blessing. We kind of run content stuff on the side, and we're trying to grow that. How do you manage looking for, like a 9 to 5, like to keep a roof over my head, mental health, and also like not let my partner down? How do you kind of manage time? It's kind of seems like a lot right now. So if you have any tips.
I guess the thing that, because I'm a little bit in that space where it's like you do the 9 to 5 every day, and you then try to figure out how you're going to slot all the other things in that you want to do into the rest of the time that you actually have.
Yeah.
I focus on small wins all the time, and that's really important because even when my 9 to 5 job is not doing what it needs to do to kind of fulfill me, I can lean back and look at, and if you document the things that are good in the space that you're in, that you have accomplished, that you've kind of knocked down, that you've kind of made a stride towards, you have to make sure that you're keeping note of those things. That has been really helpful for mental health for me, because I can get really depressed, and I'm an introvert, and people don't know that, but it's like, yeah, I'm super introverted. But being able to take note and kind of count of the small wins that you possibly can find in the spaces that you're trying to get things done is really, really helpful to kind of move you forward when things are really, really bad.
Perfect.
And have a network of people you can talk to that you can go, I'm having a shitty day, I need to be around people, or I don't need to be around people.
Yep.
Or if you don't hear from me like in 24 hours, check on me. Have those real friends that you can, have those real hard conversations with, and make sure they're trusted friends. I found very often if I even try to vent on the internet, I get a lot of useless, unwanted advice and stupid advice. It's like, go try quinoa and yoga. And I'm like, fuck and you. So have a trusted circle. It's really, really important.
Hashtag kale.
Yeah.
You live in Portland. You don't get an opinion.
To add on to
Okay.
that just a little bit too, I mentioned I've been in the industry 15 years. I've been laid off 3 times. The first time I got laid off, I'd been in the industry for 12. I've been working for 12 years straight.
Oh wow.
So it came as a shock. It was like, hey, can you come to this meeting room for a second? Okay, your job's gone. All these people you work with, you've been working for the last 2 years. You're probably never going to see them again. It's really hard. It's a real emotional thing. And even though we try to separate ourselves from our jobs, there's still some emotional investment in it, especially for a job you've been in a long time, and especially for jobs in this industry as well, which is a creative industry, so we do tend to put a lot of ourselves into it. So just echoing what everyone said, the first time I got laid off, I freaked out. I was like, oh my God, what do I do? How do I pay my rent? I live in San Francisco. How do I pay my rent? Like how do you do things? And the very first thing I did was, okay, I know there's some things I got to get in check. I got to get my finances in check. I got to figure out what I've got and what I don't got and what I need to have. That was really important.
Okay.
Second thing, like what Tanya was saying, find your community. Make sure that they know. Like, I've had friends who were laid off and they kept it a secret, and because they're embarrassed about it. We shouldn't be embarrassed about it. Like, especially the way the game industry works. There is no shame in losing your job. There's no shame in getting laid off. It happens to people all the effing time. We can talk separately about why and all that kind of stuff. That's a separate conversation. But also, self-care is super important. When you're trying to find a job, it's basically a full-time job. When I got laid off from Microsoft back in January, I instituted a full-time job of finding a new job. But I found myself working until 9 p.m. trying to find a new job, getting up at 6 a.m., working myself half to death, and I had to take a step back and say, you know what? I still need to take into account self-care, because those folks that used to be my network, people at work, those relationships change. They're at work all day. You're not, right? So you need to find out what works for you, and that's the most important thing is self-care to ensure that you can make it.
Awesome. Well,
And
thank
if I could echo that, be okay with the fact that you're not going to be perfect at it.
Yeah.
Don't beat yourself up too hard for it. Since Tanya mentioned talking more about failure, because I definitely, anytime I was like, everything's so stressful right now, and I didn't do the right thing, that became like another sort of negative feedback loop.
Yeah.
And mindfulness is such a good thing to have, and just be like, it's okay to feel shitty about this. I'm going to let the thought pass and acknowledge that and let it go and move on.
Perfect. Thank you, everyone.
All right, so we only have 3 minutes left, and you all have been there a while, and I saw you get up to the mic. So if we don't get to all the questions, which I don't think we will hang out for a little bit, outside the room because there's another panel that's apparently super popular, and there's probably a huge queue already. So if you could quickly give us your question.
Me? Or-
Are you waiting to ask a question?
Oh, yeah. So this is kind of piggybacking off the fact that, like, for people of color, there's that phrase that, like, you have to work twice as hard to get even half as far, right? And for me, like, in 2013, that was kind of when I decided that, like, I want to work at a place like IGN or GameSpot or, like, one of, like, the big gaming outlets because, like, I want to be that, well, at the time, my driving force was I want to be that voice for people who aren't heard. And so fast forwarding to now I'm running my site with Alex. We're doing videos, podcasts, articles, working as hard as we can, putting out content that we feel very confident in.
Okay, I'm going to be that moderator. I'm going to please ask you for the question.
Okay. So when you're in a place where you're creating content for an industry, to try and get into an industry that feels kind of impossible to get into, how do you, like, keep from either quitting or, like, going crazy while doing it? Yeah.
I like how everybody just turned to me. For me, it's like, you know what? I carved this place out. I have bled and I have sweated and I have done all this work. I have hustled for almost 3 years. The last year and a half strictly just running on Patreon and people's goodwill. There is a space for me. I see more and more black people where I go. I see more people of color. And I know that eventually, it may not seem like right now, but there is a space for us in here. It's why Kahlief and Sharif, Cicero and I do what we do. It's why Shana stays in the industry. It's why Brandon hustles so fucking hard. There is a place for us, and if I quit, that's just some other mediocre white dude that's gonna come in and take a place that he thinks is his. So that's what I do. I use spite. I actually gave a talk about spite and motivation, and Zoe and I were at the same conference. So spite may not work for you, but it works for me because I'm an ornery asshole. We have 1 minute left. So if you can very quickly ask, and then we will see you outside in the hall.
What's your power-up move? Like, how do you get yourself into your place of power so you can just bust through your barriers? If you have one, or you probably have a whole bunch, but is there just something you do
Bacon.
to yourself? Good one.
I play drums because nothing makes you feel more powerful than beating on something with a stick. You know?
All right. Unfortunately, that is time. I know we were very chatty. Like I said, we will hang around in the hall for a little bit. And also, please be mindful of people's time and personal space as we go out and answer questions. So thank you all very, very much
Thank you,
for
everybody.
coming.
Every day I'm hustling, every day I'm hustling, every day I'm hustling.